You know, everyone thinks the worst crimes happen down in the gutters, down where the neon tubes are cracked and blinking, spitting sparks into the puddles. But that's a misconception. Down there, crime is just about survival. It's raw, it's messy, it's predictable. The real horrors, the ones that actually keep me awake when the air scrubbers cycle at 3 a.m. They happen 60 stories up where the air is thin, crisp, and expensive, up where the corporate moguls live behind smart glass that filters out the smell of the lower districts. I was looking at this old data ledger today, a real relic, leather-bound but embedded with a silicone spine. It belonged to Alistair Vance. You probably haven't heard the name mentioned in a decade. The media networks ran a massive scrub on him after the incident. They replaced his legacy with synthetic headlines about stock market corrections. Vance was the architect of the neural cloud network. If you've ever uploaded a memory, a sentiment, or a visual archive to the mainframe, you were walking across a bridge he built. He owned the horizon. But the thing about men who own everything is that they eventually run out of things to buy, except time. They always want more time. It was a Thursday when his chief of security contacted me. Not through the standard priority channels, mind you. He used an old shortwave analog frequency that most detectives haven't monitored since the Reconstruction era. It was just a coordinate and an access phrase. The sky is a mirror. I took the high-speed lift up to the penthouse tier. It's a strange sensation, rising above the smog line. The air changes. It loses that metallic tint of copper and grease, and suddenly it tastes like nothing. Synthetic ozone and frozen lilies. Vance's estate was completely silent. No staff, no automated service units, just acres of white marble floors inlaid with glowing silver circuitry. And right in the center of his private study, sitting in a life support pod that looked more like an ornate sarcophagus, was Alistair. He was dying. The cellular degradation was something even his trillions couldn't patch. His biological heart was throwing errors every few minutes. But he wasn't looking at medical monitors. He was staring at a massive holographic tree floating in the center of the room. Every leaf on that tree was a glowing cluster of data, thousands of them, brighter than the stars we never get to see through the pollution. His security chief leaned in close to me. His voice was trembling under his cybernetic vocal modulator. He said, "The chief executive has built a lifeboat, but he stole the wood." It took me 3 hours of deep-level diagnostic scanning to understand what I was looking at. Vance hadn't just created an artificial intelligence clone of himself to run the company after his expiration. He was attempting a literal soul transfer, a complete migration of consciousness. But the human mind isn't just a collection of binaries. You can't just copy and paste a soul. It requires a tremendous amount of raw, emotional ballast to ground digital consciousness. It needs context. It needs a foundation of lived human experience to prevent the data from fracturing into madness. And do you know where he got that ballast? He didn't use his own memories. His own life was too sterile, too calculated, too cold. Instead, his company had been quietly harvesting the neural dumps from the public hospice centers in Sector 4, the free clinics. When the penniless, the forgotten, the low-tier workers went into those clinics to die, they were offered free pain management, a quiet departure. But the fine print in those biometric waivers, it gave Vance's corporation the right to salvage their digital leftovers, their childhood memories, their first loves, the sound of their mother's voices, the specific warmth of an afternoon they spent sitting on a curb 40 years ago. He was taking those stolen fragments of ordinary, beautiful human misery and using them as a mortar, a glue to hold his own synthetic ego together in the digital matrix. The holographic tree in his room, it was woven out of 1,000 stolen lives. He was building his immortality out of the ghosts of the people his factories had spent decades exhausting. The security chief wanted me to destroy the server core before the transfer finalized. He couldn't do it himself. His neural implants had a hard-coded loyalty override that would fry his brain if he attempted to sabotage company property. But me, I was a contractor, a freelancer, an outsider with a rusted badge and nothing left to lose. I stood there, looking at Vance. He couldn't speak, but his one remaining organic eye followed me. It wasn't the eye of a monster. It was just an old, terrified man who was staring into the void and refusing to fall. He looked so small beneath that towering, brilliant tree of stolen light. My hand was over the primary power conduit. If I severed it, the backup generators would take 10 seconds to engage. In those 10 seconds, the volatile memory array would collapse. The billionaire would die a completely natural, biological death. But those thousands of harvested memories, they would be erased too, gone forever, dissolved into digital static. If I let the transfer complete, those people's memories would live on, technically. They would be preserved inside the network of a god. They would see the stars from the top tier. They would survive for centuries inside his digital heaven. But they would be slaves to his consciousness, a foundation for his empire. I stood in that silent room for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the rhythmic swirr of his respirator. Outside the glass, a transport cruiser drifted past, its searchlight sweeping across the marble floor like a cold, golden scythe. In the end, I didn't pull the cable, and I didn't let the transfer finish either. I found a third option, hidden in the architecture of the code, a logic loop. I isolated the core database. I locked Alistair Vance inside his own lifeboat, but I severed the steering wheel. I quarantined the entire system. The billionaire's consciousness migrated into the tree, yes, but he didn't get to run the corporation. He didn't get to rule Sector 4 from the cloud. He's up there right now, in that abandoned penthouse, locked in a permanent, looping dream state with 1,000 strangers. He is experiencing their lives, their sorrows, their small, quiet joys, over and over again, unable to separate himself from the people he plundered. And the company covered it up, said he went into seclusion. They shut down the penthouse, welded the elevator doors shut, and moved the headquarters to Sector 1. Now that high-altitude tomb just sits there, completely dark, surrounded by the clouds. Every once in a while, when the atmospheric pressure drops and the rain turns to ice on my office window, I tune my old shortwave receiver to that frequency. The sky is a mirror. You don't hear data packets anymore. You just hear this faint, beautiful, chaotic symphony of mixed signals. The lullaby of 1,000 lower grid lives, playing out in the dark 60 stories above the world. It's a mess of static and sentiment, but it's peaceful. The grid is shutting down its secondary pathways for the night cycle. The lights in the high-rises are blinking out, one by one, leaving just the cold glow of the automated beacons. It's time to log off the local terminals. The data can sleep. The city can wait. Tell me, if you were standing in that high-altitude room, holding the weight of 1,000 forgotten lives in your hand, would you have pulled the plug? Or would you have left them to dream together in the dark?